With a population of more than 3 million, it's hard to imagine the number of people in Toronto that feel lonely.
We may be surrounded by people, but it seems we're lacking in real human interactions. That's according to a new report that ranked our city as one of the loneliest in the country.
Now, this is a video that I certainly did not expect to make this week, and quite honestly, it wasn't until I came across that YouTube video that talked about the rise of loneliness out in Toronto that I felt like I wanted to talk about some of the challenges that I faced when I first moved here at 18 years of age to the time that I am right now living alone and still in Toronto. I have to admit, there are still certainly days where I feel like my levels of loneliness are greater than others. It took me a number of years to really get comfortable doing things by myself, living alone, or even doing activities that are just out of my comfort zone, and that includes YouTube. Loneliness is a complex and subjective emotional state when a person sees a discrepancy between their level of desired social connection and their actual level of social interaction. And yes, as you may already know, you can have many friends or people in general in your life, but if you don't have any meaningful or genuine connection, you can still feel quite alone. Also, I do understand that in this video, I'm gonna be a little bit more open and vulnerable with you guys, so I really appreciate it if you guys could do me a favor, hit the like button, and now, let's begin. Every time I moved cities, whether it was my first time moving to Toronto or relocating to Calgary, I always made an effort to stay in touch with my friends and family. I know this one's pretty cliche, and I'm making a big assumption that you already have a great relation with them. So later on in this video, I'll talk about how I approach meeting like-minded individuals. That said, I always just found it helpful whenever I called up or video called my friends and family. There are plenty of times where I thought to myself that I'm bothering them or they're just too busy with their own schedules, and I just realized that narrative was just in my mind, and I found that people in general are open to chatting with you as much as you are to them, as long as you're willing to make that initial step. And generally speaking, by staying in touch with friends and family, despite some of them not even living in the same city, it has enabled me to take on greater risks in my life, whether that was switching up cities again, taking on different career opportunities, because I knew I had people in my back corner who I could ultimately rely on in the event of worst case scenarios. For example, in my earlier university days when I lived in a really crappy basement suite with roommates, I felt very lonely and questioned how my life turned out this way. It was always just a good peace of mind just knowing that if I really wanted to leave, I could always just say the hell with it. The same principle applied when I moved to Calgary back in 2020 after finding out that I was going to lose my corporate job out here in Toronto, that I decided that I was going to live for the very first time all alone. I moved there in the early days of the pandemic. I had no friends going into that city, and ultimately I had nothing to do in that city because everything was closed. But what I did do was I tried my best to stay in touch with the people who were closest to me on the days that I felt most alone. Number 2 would be to do activities, but don't force any sort of friendship or relationship out of loneliness. So originally, I was thinking about saying all these cliche things that you probably already heard about, like joining a recreational sports team, going volunteering, taking some classes, which are all 100% all great ways to meet people. But I want to focus on just genuinely doing things that you actually care about. And part of it would just have to be with getting out of your comfort zone. I found myself in Toronto just naturally doing things alone that I would have done with or without people. That has led me to some of the closest friendships that I have in the city, and I think part of it has to do with just staying focused with my growth as a person, continuing education, or just playing various sports. And this by all means is not to say that from me doing all these things that I have made so many friends that I don't know who to call up. If anything, I felt like I probably have a lot of people who dislike me along the way, and that's totally fine, because what I come to learn is that the more brutally honest you are with others, the more likely you are to find genuine connection versus people who just have more of a superficial personality that is trying to impress everyone else. Here's the thing that I learned over the years about friendships, relationships, co-workers, acquaintances, and it's the law of attraction. You naturally will attract what you think you're worth and what you put out there in the world. So if you're a person that values fitness, going to the gym, or even playing Pokemon all day, well then guess what? You're also more likely to naturally meet someone that values the same thing. As you would imagine, this applies the other side. If you're someone that's more negative, then you're more likely to push away the positive and gravitate towards people who reaffirm the same negative beliefs as you. And this is why I feel like it's important to work on yourself and be the best version of yourself, because you'll tend to attract people who are just like you. Lastly, I want to talk about therapy, and I know this is something that I never talked about on this channel, but I think it's something important that I want to highlight, especially if we're going to be talking about loneliness living in Toronto. I can very well acknowledge that if you're already feeling lonely and you have people on the streets of Toronto telling you how it's not that lonely of a city, it can really make you feel that much worse, but let's just see what they have to say first.
For the most part, I don't think it's a lonely city.
No, I don't think so. It's pretty crowded. There are people all around.
Not really, no. I mean, we lived in New York and DC and Seattle and not really found Toronto any different than any other big city.
You know, it's sort of funny because this is the same energy, same type of people that would probably tell me how Toronto is affordable and that I shouldn't be concerned. What I'm looking for them is just their recognition that it can be a lonely city. Not that if they're experiencing any sort of loneliness themselves. Anyways, back to talking about therapy. So I tried it for the very first time a couple months ago out of curiosity, and I really wanted to see how it could benefit my mental health. And truthfully, part of it also was that I just wanted to use up my company benefits. Going out of it, I must say, I believe a lot of people, if not everyone, could benefit from having a therapist, or basically just someone that's outside of your family and friend circle who you could actively talk to, someone that can listen to you, and just work with things that are going on with your life. Truthfully, I felt like I had this false narrative in my mind that something in my life must be off or something is even wrong with me to having to book a session with someone, and boy was I wrong. Honestly, it can be so casual where you're just talking to a stranger with no real agenda if you don't have one. And I'm saying this without being sponsored from anyone. Rather, I'm just trying to bring more light into the therapy space, especially as a guy on the YouTube space. I feel like this could really benefit anyone that's struggling with something, and that includes loneliness. At the end of the day, dealing with loneliness in Toronto or in any city can be quite challenging and difficult. And just because you have family and friends or acquaintances, you can still feel levels of isolation on certain days, and that's totally okay. I'm also aware that just because I have highlighted a few things that have worked for me over the years when dealing with loneliness in Toronto doesn't necessarily mean that this is a one-size-fits-all approach and that this should and work for everyone else. Toronto very well is a big city and can be quite overwhelming with its massive population and high cost of living. It can make your levels of isolation feel that much worse too. I think it's important and pretty bold to get help when you need it, and if that's reaching out to your loved ones, doing different activities, or speaking with professionals, then it's a good starting point to start off with when you're feeling a little bit out of touch with the world. As I said earlier, I know this video is a little bit different and more vulnerable, but I wanted to touch on topics like these where I feel like it can really help those who are faced with the reality when relocating cities in general out in Canada. So anyhow, with that said guys, I hope you guys enjoyed my take on loneliness living in Toronto. If you have any thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section down below. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and I guess I'll see you all in the next one.